I'm Cindy Kelly, Atomic Heritage Foundation, and it's Tuesday, March 13, 2018, and I'm in Orland Park, Illinois. And I have with me William Nicholson. And I'd first like to ask him to say his full name and spell it.
Oh, my name is William J. Joseph Nicholson, William J. Joseph, Joseph, Nicholson, Nichoolson.
Perfect. At any rate, thank you very much. It's so great to be here in Chicagoland and interview you about your illustrious past.
Oh,
Especially your role on the Chicago Pile 1. Anyway, why don't you start by just telling us where you were born and when, your birthday, and what your childhood was like.
well, I was born on March 2nd, 1924, in Chicago, to a family of 7 at the time. I made the 8th. I was the youngest of 8 children. I had 5 sisters and 2 brothers ahead of me. We lived on the south side of Chicago in an area that might better be known as back of the yards. My father worked in the stockyards, so we lived close to the stockyards. The neighborhood was a like lower middle class working neighborhood. Very, very few professionals in it, all laborers for the most part. All hard workers and subject to the wills of the economy, whether they had a job or not. I grew up at 5123 South Union Avenue in Chicago, and for the first 5 or 6 years of my life, I was obviously home, and then started grammar school when I was about 6. At grammar school in first grade is where I met my wife, actually. And we both lived, obviously, in the same neighborhood. We went to a Catholic school at that time and spent 8 years in that school in that neighborhood. I was always interested in aviation and aeronautics and the achievements and feats of many of the World War I pilots and the prestigious pilots of the day, like Wiley Post and others like him. I wanted to be a flyer, and I had an opportunity to go to a nearby, very accomplished technical school, public school, Tilden Technical High School, which was only a few blocks away. But I wanted to go to St. Rita High School because they had an aeronautical engineering course, and they had actual airplanes, and they taught much of the curricula for pre-engineering in aeronautics, and that was my love. I made every effort to go to that school, although it was fairly expensive at the time. It cost $10 a month. And my family could not afford it. My father had been out of work for the better part of 6 or 7 years at that time. So I made a compromise deal with the head of the St. Rita School that I would work in their classrooms. I would work to sweep out their classrooms after school every day for $3 a month. The way I figured it, it was about 40 hours for $3 in a month's time. But that helped me. I made up the remaining amount of money as best I could by selling airplane rides out at an airport called Ashburn Airport, which at that time was in a real hinterland. It was out it might have been the middle of Wyoming for all anybody knew. There was nothing around it. It was an airport called Ashburn Airport, and the service was General Air Service. It was a private operation, and the owner of it was Bernard DeWitt, and he allowed me to sell airplane rides to people who would come in off Cicero Avenue and watch the airplanes coming in and going out up close. And I would try to sell them an airplane ride for $1.50, and I got 15 cents for it. And I made up enough money to cover my expenses at school. The following years were no problem because I was part of a baseball team that was highly effective, a neighborhood baseball team. And the following summer, after my first year of high school, we played some 78 games for the entire season, and we won 55 of them. And on each game, I was betting money. If I bet $2 and we won, I got 4 back, etc. And I won enough money to pay for my full year's tuition, for my mother to get some new clothes, my father to get a winter overcoat, and have some surplus money for the family. I stayed at St. Rita's for 4 years, graduated in 1942, and at 1942 I was looking for a job. A neighbor told me that the University of Chicago was hiring people, and that they might be interested in me. I might add that at St. Rita's I not only learned a lot of mathematics and sciences in the course of the studies, but I also learned the practical, developed the practical knowledge of machinery and could operate very efficiently on metal lathes, shapers, milling machines, power saws, you name it, I could do it. I also had courses in engineering drawings and engineering drawing interpretations, so I was capable of reading blueprints without any problem. I had skills that I tried to sell, and it wasn't working out. Until this neighbor told me that the University of Chicago was hiring, and I took a streetcar over to the University of Chicago, inquired about it, was interviewed by a gentleman, I don't remember his name. I don't know if I ever knew his name. But I was interviewed, and he said, I think we could use you, especially your mechanical skills. So that's how I became an employee of the Manhattan Project. I was assigned to work with a Dr. Creutz, Ed Creutz, C-R-E-U-T-Z. He was the chief physicist, and he and Jules Simmons was the chief metallurgist, and a fellow by the name of Tom Langen and I comprised a team that was to work on alloys of uranium and whatever other matters came up. Dr. Creutz was from Princeton, and he looked like a linebacker for the Chicago Bears. He was young and big and muscular, but a hell of a nice guy. Very intelligent, very knowledgeable. Jules Simmons came from LSU University, and also a great guy, good sense of humor. Tom Langen, I think, was perhaps a grad student associate for Dr. Creutz, but he was a kind of an in-between worker who generally relayed instructions from Creutz and Simmons to us, to myself and one other fellow, whose name I can't remember right now. This was just the nucleus and the beginning of a team working in a space that was totally barren. It was under the north stands of Stagg Field, the football field for the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago, years before that, had eliminated sports as a primary activity in the university, and they wanted to concentrate on academics rather than sports. The field was not being used at all. The stands weren't being used. So a structure was built under the north stands, about the mezzanine level of the stands, approximately the size of like a 4-car garage. It had heat, I think. It was equipped with electrical power and lights and water. No windows. It looked like a large, empty shed of some kind, hidden under the stands. That was the start of my employment at the University of Chicago. And my first assignment was to build electric furnaces, induction electric furnaces. And this was for the purpose of creating alloys that could be further tested in other laboratories. Exactly where, I don't know. But these furnaces were unique in that they consisted of a silica tube about 5 feet high, about 12 inches in diameter, with an inner diameter of about 10 inches. So a wall thickness of about 1 inch. These came from England and were very expensive and very difficult to make. I don't know what the manufacturing process was, but whatever it was, it resulted in an extremely smooth finish in the center of this silica tube. It was like glass, and the entire tube was very brittle. It had to be very carefully handled or it would shatter. I would prepare an electric coil, about 1/2 inch copper tubing, and make a coil that circled the outside surface of the silica tubes, and when connected to a power source like 240 or 400 volts, etc., would create heat in the center of that tube. And we could melt uranium-238, which requires a little bit better than 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit to melt. We could melt that and any other metal that we wanted to and make alloys of uranium. Now, exactly why the metallurgists were experimenting with alloys of uranium, I didn't know. Whatever alloys we made were further tested in other laboratories. And later, when I learned more about the pile that was happening, that was built in the west stands rather, and the chain reaction, and knew something about the graphite content of the piles, I realized maybe some of the alloys we melted were actually in that pile, and maybe added to maybe contributed to the success of the nuclear reaction and the chain reaction on December 2nd, 1942. We made hundreds and hundreds of different alloys, tested different alloys. In time, we had not only one of these furnaces that I constructed, but 4 of these furnaces. We had 4 huge tubes with the coils of copper around them, and we could make 4 different compositions at once and melt them and make small samples. There were also times when we made large samples, what we call billets. The billet was about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, perhaps about 8 inches high, and weighed a ton. Uranium is extremely heavy and hard. And the purpose of making these billets was so that they could be taken to Detroit to a tube company, I believe it was called Wolverine Tube and Extrusion Company. Taken there on a Friday night train, and Saturday there was nobody in the plant, or virtually nobody except supervisors and people who had been cleared by security to be, so they could witness what we were doing. And we would have these huge billets placed in a extrusion machine, and with very high hydraulic pressure ram, force that billet through a die, which would reduce it down to about 2-inch diameter tube, a pipe rather. And once that piston pushed that billet into that die, and the extrusion came out the other end, it resulted in a pipe, a solid uranium, about 2 to 2.5 inches in diameter, and perhaps 8 or 10 feet long from this little tube. It was extruded through this small die. Then those pipes were further cut in smaller pieces so they could be transported more readily, and they were brought back to our laboratory. And then I would grind them to outside surface to clean up the surfaces, and I would cut them into slugs of about 2 inches in depth for the slug, about 2.5 inches in diameter. Turns out that the graphite bars that were used to build a pile had holes bored in the ends of these graphite bars down to about 2 inches into the graphite bar. Graphite bar was probably 4 inches square, about 1 meter long. And these pieces of uranium alloys were dropped into those holes, those recesses in the carbon bar, or graphite bar. And the pile was built with these. Now, whether every bar had graphite or had uranium alloy in it or not, I don't know. That was another department, that was another area, and I wasn't involved in that. But we supplied the little slugs that went in there. And I don't know whether they used, for example, on a chain reaction test, if they used 10 of them or 1,000 of them. I don't know. That was up to Fermi and others. I'll try to talk about the pile a little bit in more detail in a minute. So that's what we were doing, and we were formulating uranium compounds and providing this other group with the uranium slugs that could be used in the building of the pile. Some were obviously in the pile when we had the first successful chain reaction. What the composition was, I don't know. I might add at this point that we had almost no protective equipment or clothing at all during all this time. Uranium dust was as common on us as sand at a beach. We were breathing the uranium fumes from the grinding wheels and from the saws, etc. We even carried it around in our lab coat pockets. You could dust it off your coat like that. And there were times when I worried about what might happen medically to me in short term or long term. Since I'm now 94, I don't think it bothered me, at least not to my knowledge. Now let's see. I used the machinery of the University of Chicago, which was located in the machinery was located in the basement of a building called Ryerson Physical Laboratory. Ryerson, physical laboratory, and Chapin Hall. And I used to walk across campus. If there were small enough pieces of uranium or slugs of uranium, I'd carry them. Otherwise, I'd have some kind of a wagon or a truck to haul them because they were, like I said, extremely heavy. I used the equipment in the basement of Ryerson Physical Laboratory like it was mine. They had lathes there, shapers, milling machines, drills, cutting apparatus, all kinds of equipment. And I could go there without any reservation and do whatever work I did, and back across campus, across the football field, and up in the stands on the north stands to our office. Office, I call it, but it was like just a barn. They had a power saw there that had hacksaw blades that were the thickest I've ever seen, and the longest and the biggest, and with the largest teeth I've ever seen in my life. And the power saw would take these blades, I'd install them on the power saw, and then place the saw on the piece of uranium that wanted to be cut, either a billet or a rod or something. And then that saw would automatically or power and saw away with it. And that uranium would wear those teeth out to nothing, to where there was no teeth on the blades. Time after time after time, we went through dozens and dozens and dozens of blades of the hardest kind of steel, and it just wore them out in short order. We'd have to requisition more blades for the machinery, which I'd turn into requisition, and it would be sent to the University of Chicago, and the blades would arrive by magic from somebody. I might add a little point of interest. I was always surprised and never understood it exactly. A good machinist can look at the sparks that come off a piece of metal and almost tell you what the composition of the metal is. I didn't classify myself as an experienced machinist, but the sparks that came off of the uranium were fantastic. They were unique. When you put it on a grinding wheel or on a saw, and the grinding wheel was grinding into the uranium, sparks would come out like a 4th of July sparkler. And they would fly in the air for 3-4 feet. So they'd be coming over my shoulders, etc. But when they got to the point of about 3 or 4 feet, they'd explode. Bam. These little sparks were like small pieces of gunpowder or something. They just explode. And they go bam, 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 bam. As these sparks were going all around us like that. I never had that explained to me. I never understood it, but it happened. And it would happen with uranium all the time. It's part of the magic of the metal. I might also want to mention one time we placed an order for and received another silica tube from England. It took months to get it, and then it had to come across through the North Atlantic, of course, which was rife with German submarines. Luckily it avoided it. Came across the U.S. on train, was delivered to our lab up in the North Stands. Outside the North Stands, there were some helper people I didn't know, but they worked in the group, and they did odd jobs, I guess. And they took this tube, this silica tube, placed it on a flatbed truck, and pushed it over to our laboratory, to the door out on the mezzanine level, where our lab entrance to the lab was positioned. At that point, everybody came out, all the principals, Creutz and Simmons and Langan and myself, when I came out to view this marvelous piece of equipment that arrived from England, and it was so precious. I have no idea the cost, but it was horrendous, I guess. And we had, and it was, and the tube was on the flatbed truck, and it was blocked with blocks on the side so it wouldn't roll off. Well, in preparing the tube to go into the laboratory, these fellas took these blocks off of the sides of the tube, and the first movement of the wagon at all, this thing just rolled over and fell about 4 inches to the ground and just shattered. And I thought that Creutz and Simmons and Langan were going to cry. Literally, grown men. They were so dedicated to their job that the loss of this was critical, and they almost felt like failure had occurred. There was a constant concern that the German research effort on the same atomic energy program, or same type of program, was ahead of us by a long way. And so this was just going to hold us back a little bit more. And it was a body blow to us. That was one of the saddest days I saw in the entire operation there. I might add that these people, the principals like Szilard and Fermi and Compton and Wattenberg and Zinn, Anderson, and everybody in the hierarchy were the greatest brains of the 20th century, I thought, at that time. But they were all very sober, very serious. 20 hours a day was maybe normal for them to work. Weekends as well. They had no limits on time, again, because of their fear that the Germans were ahead of us. They were very subdued people. They were quiet. They were serious all the time, except on two occasions. One was December 2nd, 1942, when the first chain reaction was successful. Then there was euphoria. There was dancing and hollering and hooping and et cetera, almost like a 16-year-old's party. The second time that I saw that same element of joy and happiness was when it was the date I don't remember, but it was late February of 1943 when the British commandos attacked the heavy water plant in Norway and inflicted significant damage on the plant, such that the expectation was that it was out of order for a long period of time, out of production, etc. This gave everybody great joy, because now maybe we could catch up to the Germans, because they got a big delay thrown in their lap. We didn't know that the Germans were behind us at that time. The fear was they were ahead of us, and so the incentive was to beat them to the end result. Fortunately, we did. My work there, I was always aware that there was huge secrecy associated with whatever we did. It was drilled into us constantly by the leaders and by the security forces, etc. There were known agents of the German government in and around the University of Chicago, and we were told that, and that we were not to reveal anything of what you do. Don't take up with strangers. If you're having a sandwich someplace or a beer or whatever, watch out that people who may engage you in conversation would be damaging to the war effort, and that they may actually be the enemy. And so that part of the secrecy was well known. I also knew that we were pursuing atomic energy. What I didn't know was that it was a bomb. I thought we were going to be developing atomic engines that would allow our aircraft and our battleships, etc., to provide the engine, the atomic energy would provide fuel for propulsion and for use in all the mechanical equipment ad nauseum, without replenishing, without end. We'd never have to come back to the base to get more fuel, etc. You could go around the world many times as you want without refueling. Well, some of that was true, in that some of our current military equipment can do that. They do have the propulsion units and the power units that are consistent with continuous operation without refueling. That part was true. I did not know about a bomb at that time. I just knew there was great secrecy. I never even spoke about this subject to my family, at home, or anyone. I was very concerned with that. And my love for aeronautics, my love for airplanes going way back, was such that, and I started flying when I was 13 at this same airport where I was selling airplane rides. The owner took a liking to me and took me flying and taught me how to fly, and for free at that time. So I wanted to pursue flying, and I wanted to be in the Navy Air Force. And it's probably not a nice thing to say, but I said it, and I can't take it back. I wanted to shoot down Japanese at that time because of Pearl Harbor and all. And I was totally confident I could do it. I had no question at all about my capabilities. So I decided to give up my gold-plated deferment. And I always laughingly say it. I don't know what my deferment number was when I was working at the University of Chicago, but it was high enough to where they would have taken women and children before they would have taken me. But as soon as I made my intentions known to my superiors, I was cautioned and I was coached on exactly what to say in the military, what to say on any forms I fill out, not to reveal where I was working or what I was doing, etc. And this was by General Grove, I think, who he was in charge of security, and he had all the forms in front, and he had me fill them out, and so that they're very innocent forms, not revealing a thing. I maintained that secrecy all during the service. Nobody knew where I worked. Nobody knew what I did. They thought I was a machinist. That's it, period. So I made my intentions known about leaving, and I went downtown Chicago and took the test for the Navy Air Force with 3 or 4 of my neighborhood friends. And of the 3 or 4 of us, I think there was 4 of us, I was the only one that passed. 2-day examination, 1 day on intelligence matters and 1 day on physical health and all that. I passed everything, and I was scheduled for Pensacola, Florida, for a flight school for the Navy. Made me happy as a hog in mud. And everybody at the University of Chicago was sorry to see me leave, but in a sense they had already accomplished what we set out to do. And prior to my leaving, I was offered a job at sites X, Y, and Z. Now, X, Y, and Z were the designations for 3 locations that were secret locations, one of which turns out to be Hanford, Washington. One was Los Alamos, New Mexico. The third one, I can't remember where it was. It might have been in Tennessee
Probably Oak Ridge.
Might have been Oak Ridge. But X, Y, and Z. The conditions were if you take the job in any one of those places, you're going to be interned for the rest of the war. You're going to live in a compound. You're not going to be out. You're going to be restricted to a great extent, etc. And I decided I'd rather fly. So I passed the exam and waited for the Navy to call me to go to Pensacola. Meantime, as soon as the draft board heard I'd given up my deferment, bam, they made me 1A. I got that notice about 3 weeks after I informed them. And about 3 weeks later, they asked me to report for a physical exam. And I called the Navy, and they said, don't worry about it. We got it covered. You're going to be okay. And because they gave me a contact to call. And I said, okay. I went, got a physical, taken, and everything passed okay. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, I get a notice saying, report to Camp Grant, Illinois for induction into the Army. I called the Navy right away. They said, we'll take care of it. We'll squash that, etc. Well, I waited and waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. Came down to the day, and I had to report, or else I'd be AWOL or deserter or something. And I reported to Camp Grant. 2 or 3 days later, they sent me to St. Petersburg, Florida, for Air Force, Army Air Force. And I was on a drill field about the 3rd or 4th day down there. I was on a drill field, and a fellow with a Jeep comes out to the drill field, says, your mother's got an emergency call in the office, headquarter office. We want you to pick it up. Jump in the Jeep, we'll take you there. So get there, my mother's telling me I got a telegram saying report to Pensacola, Florida for naval air training. Right opposite the place where the phone where I was talking to my mother was the colonel's office, the colonel of the base. And I walked into his office after properly hesitating and saluting and all that. And he looked up from his paper and said, what do you want? And I said, I have a telegram at home saying I should report to Pensacola, Florida in 2 or 3 days hence, and for the Navy Air Force. He puts down his paper and he said, what? And I repeated myself. And he said, tough shit, soldier, we got you now. Get out of here. That was the end of my Navy career. So I flew for the Army. In those days, there wasn't an Air Force per se. There was an Army Air Force, there was a Navy Air Force, there was a Marine Air Force. In 1945, around 1948, I think, after the war, they created an Air Force, a standalone operation. I was not in that Air Force, I was in the Army Air Force, the predecessor of it. And the irony of the thing is, I was flying bombers, B-24 bombers, out of a base in southern England. And the irony of the thing is, I got out of my job at the University of Chicago to shoot down Japanese, and here I am being shot down by the Germans, which happened several times. I thought, isn't that something? I didn't even get to see the Japanese, but the Germans are taking care of me. They're knocking me out of the sky. Fortunately, we survived. And 1945, I was discharged. I returned to Chicago. And, I should mention, in 1945, in June, I was on furlough from England. The war was over, and I had 30-day furlough in the States. And I went to the University of Chicago. And I don't remember who I called, but I called and said, can we get together and just shoot a fat, etc. He said, oh yeah, and so time and place was a day or two after that, and we met on what's called the Midway of the University of Chicago. The Midway is a grassy area. It's about half a block long, and wide rather, grassy area with traffic going east on one side of it and west on the other side. And we met in the middle of that grassy area. I'm emphasizing that to point out the security that was involved in our meeting. There was nobody around us. There were cars passing on either side of us about, 100 yards away this way and 100 yards away this way. And but they were flying by, and there was nobody around above us or around us. And the people that joined in this little get-together out on the Midway area informed me, after looking around to make sure that nobody was around, they said, "We finally got the bomb. We've tested it in Los Alamos, and it's dynamite." And they said, "Where are you going from here?" And I said, "I don't know, I may go into B-29s. And they said, "Whoa, wouldn't it be something if you got to carry the bomb?" I said, "It's not likely because, the training to learn the B-29 as opposed to B-24 is probably going to take a couple of months, and you're not going to sit around that long, I'm sure, if you got the bombs out there already." And that was true. Meantime, I was shipped to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, an air base in South Dakota. And I had enough combat flying hours to where I was given the rare distinction of being able to choose whatever job I wanted after that. They said, "You've flown enough. Do you want to fly again? If you do, fine. If not, what job do you want to do?" And I couldn't think of any job off the hand, so I was there a couple of weeks. And every couple of days, I'd be down at headquarters, and they'd say, "We got a job for you over here, or something to do there." And I said, "Nah, I don't think that fits me. That's not me," and all that. So I was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota on the day the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And the loudspeakers on the air base, all over the air base, announced the fact that they had dropped this bomb. It's an atomic bomb, and they kind of explained what it was, etc. And I was in a barracks, and I was laying on my bunk listening to this, and I thought, thank God, now I don't have to worry about slipping and saying something that I shouldn't say. A big load was taken off my shoulders, and everybody was running around the camp, and it was like New Year's Eve in Times Square. Everybody was jumping up and down. People were running all over the damn place, and I just lay there real quiet, and mainly because I knew what was coming. I knew that it was coming sometime. I didn't know it was coming that day, but it was successful, and I was overjoyed that it's over with. And I completed my tour of service in the Air Force in Pio, Texas. I was in a B-29 base, but I wasn't flying. I was in charge of all the squadron mailrooms and post offices and so forth. Never worked so hard in my life, learning postal codes and all that. I thought it was an easy job, but it wasn't. It was more than selling stamps. But in October of '45, I was discharged, and I sent my wife, she was my girlfriend then, sent her a letter, and there's a word that describes the letter when you use like able, easy, use that phonetic kind of alphabet. And I sent her a phonetic letter with no explanation, with all these crazy words in there, for the letters that made up the message. And the next day, I sent her a letter with the code, how to interpret it. Well, she didn't know I was home, and at that time or when we were growing up, we lived only 2 blocks away from each other. So she was in our neighborhood one night, and I was in the neighborhood, and walking on the street. It was a damp night, I remember, and there she was coming towards me with one of her relatives, and there I am coming towards her with some friend of mine, and she didn't even know I was home. And that's the way she found out. She still has that letter, incidentally. It's in our archives here someplace. So that was the end of my military service, and I went to a school where I could brush up on my sciences and my mathematics, etc. After 3 years of not having any academic work, you get a little rusty and slow in the mind and whatnot, and I wanted to speed things up. And I wanted to go into engineering, my first love, beside my wife, you know. And so I went to school, and 8 or 9 hours a day on a subject, like trigonometry or chemistry. One subject, do a whole year's work in about 5 days, 6 days, take all the exams, etc. So we'd go 8 hours a day, and I'd do another 5 or 6 hours of study at home at night. And completed most of the courses in jig time. Courses I never had took a little longer. Even the physics courses and the chemistry courses, even with the experiments and all that sort of thing, it still only took about 3 weeks to do a year's work of physics and chemistry. And it was godsend that I did that, because I took the entrance exam for Illinois Institute of Technology. I wanted to go there. First of all, I wanted to really go to Purdue. All my life since I was a kid, I wanted to go to Purdue. I didn't know where it was, and I didn't know how I was going to get there, and I didn't know who was going to pay for it, but I was going to go to Purdue for engineering. Well, when Loretta and I got we're closer and closer, I decided maybe I'll stay in town. So I went to IIT. I was going there night school when I was drafted. I was taking night courses there. Only then it was called Armour Institute of Technology. During the war, they merged with Lewis Institute of Technology and called themselves Illinois Institute of Technology. So it was the same school, but a different name. So I took the entrance exam at IIT, passed it, we found, and entered the school in September of 1946 as a freshman. And that's where I learned that some 30-some thousand had taken the exam for entrance, and that 746 or something like that were chosen out of the 30,000. And we were told by the chancellor up on the stage in this big assembly hall, you are the cream of the crop. You are the best of the best, but we can't handle you. We're going to get rid of at least half of you in no time at all. And all the professors are instructed to go warp speed through all the courses and whatnot and weed you out. And he says, I'm telling you this as a warning. We can't handle all of you people, 700 people. I might add that prior to saying that, he said, the first thing he said is, I'd like everybody to join in groups of 4. And one of my neighbors that I grew up with, etc., he also passed IIT. So he and I were sitting there. There was a stranger on this side of me, and there's a stranger on this side of him. So we said, we're 2, how about you? Okay, you're with nobody, okay, and you're with nobody. This was Jack Dunn, and this was Arlo Southwick, these 2 guys. So we made a team of 4. In the meantime, people were scurrying around trying to get in a team of 4. He said, okay, quiet down, says the chancellor. He says, now I want you all to look at each other real good, because one of you is not going to be here in 6 months. The first semester, you're going to be wiped out. The second semester, the second one is going to be gone. We're going to wipe you out. And then he explained why. We were sitting in buildings with no roofs in them, in the classrooms. The surge of returning veterans was greater than they anticipated, and they had no building program to accommodate them. And so they were way behind. And that was true. Although the 4 of us finished the first year, the 4 of us finished the second year, and Arlo Southwick, a fellow from Blue Island over here, was a crackerjack student, good engineer student. And he was married. We weren't. The other 3 weren't married. He had demands on him that he had hard to take. He started building an expansion on his home in the summertime, etc. When he came back in the fall for the start of the third year, he kept falling behind, and he finally decided to quit. He wound up chief engineer of Clark Oil Company. Great guy. Anyhow, this guy, Jack Dunn, he went on to get his master's degree and had an unfortunate accident and whatnot, several years later died. Dick Bonk, who was my neighbor, whatnot, he was in electrical engineering. He's retired now in California, in Irvine, California. And he married one of our childhood friends as well, in the same neighborhood. We got married first. They got married the next year, I think. We've been friends for all these years, since, well, with Dick Bonk, since I was a kid. But we got married in 48, and they got married in 49. So we've been friends for a long time. But by the end of the 4 years of the original 746 or so that were entered in September of 46, September of 46, because I graduated in 50. Of the original, there's only a handful of the original left, believe it or not. Either wiped out, dropped out, transferred out, somehow or other. I've been told that there's only something like 54 or something like that was survived all the way. And we were 3 of the 4 made it. And I was very proud of that. I was proud of my Air Force career. I was proud of working at the University of Chicago, and proud of my professional career after university. I obtained my degree in 1950 and was accepted a job in the petroleum industry with Sinclair Research Laboratories. Worked for them for 16 years. And then moved to Amoco Chemicals and worked for them for 20-some years. And my last assignment was I was director of all operations for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and the communist countries at that time. My headquarters was Geneva, Switzerland, and I had offices all over Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the Middle East. And we had agencies in places like Poland and South Africa and Israel. It's not offices, but agencies. And so I had that entire responsibility for manufacturing and marketing of chemicals and profitability and et cetera. And I found out something that's been true in my life and my children's lives. All of our children have migrated into the sciences and the engineering and the mathematics. Even though we urged them in other directions, we couldn't get them. It must be in their genes. I don't know. Because Loretta was a great mathematician, great magic with math as well. But I found out that if you're good at your job, if you like your job and you're good at it, in short order, you won't be doing your job. For example, I worked as a pure engineer for several years at Sinclair, and as I got promoted, I got less and less engineering and more management and finances and union arrangements and all kinds of things, and budgeting, but it wasn't engineering. But engineering got me there to begin with. As a general comment, I might say, in my opinion now, looking back, I didn't think this way at the time, but looking back, none of the people in the U of C hierarchy like the Fermis, the Szillards, the Comptons, the Wattenbergs, and incidentally Wattenberg and Zinn, they were the two that ran the pile. And Zinn was famous for always wearing a white shirt and never getting it dirty, and with all the graphite around him and the graphite dust and all that sort of thing. And he was Dr. Wattenberg, and I don't know whatever happened to him. Zinn wound up as head of Argonne, Walter Zinn, at one point or other. But all of those fellows would fall into a classification of having little or no managerial ability. They weren't interested in being people managers. They were interested in achieving an objective, and I can't blame them for that. They did not have a hands-on management style at all. So there was a lot of freedom for us, for the workers, to innovate and to do what was not only expected but maybe unexpected. And there was little or no trouble or discipline. Everybody was motivated. But later on, I suppose, I think that I read somewhere where Creutz became a head of a large corporation, or near head of a large corporation. They were all pretty successful after the war. The instruments we had were primitive. We didn't even have a Geiger counter. Could you believe that? And we were all walking around. We were all radioactive because of all the stuff we had in our pockets and dust on us and everything else. We didn't even have a Geiger counter. We did not have masks. We didn't have dosimeters to measure the amount of radiation exposure that we had. It wasn't even thought of in those days. But you know, as a startup operation from scratch, it did pretty damn well with what they had. Everything was kind of homemade. Like our laboratory, it was homemade. It was a little bit of a steel mill in that we could melt metals and all that sort of thing. And it was a little bit of a foundry because we'd be casting into molds and all that stuff. When we had that little meeting on the Midway at the University of Chicago, one of the things that was said was that the experimental explosions at Los Alamos, prior to the explosion, the test explosions, there was great fear among all of the scientists that they couldn't stop it if they started it, that the explosions would go through and around the world, destroy the entire planet. Apparently, you know, thinking the molecules of air would start exploding and things of that sort, the hydrogen, oxygen, and all. There was great concern, and I think virtually every one of the scientists was concerned, but they decided to go ahead and try it anyhow. Fortunately, it didn't happen. If it did, we wouldn't be here to talk about it today. A fellow by the name of Dave Karinski joined our group towards September, October, I think, of '42. And he came from NYU, Dr. Dave Karinski. And he was some kind of a special chemist or metallurgist or combination of both, etc. He was a little fellow from New York and a wonderful guy, a wonderful guy. He was really kind of broken-hearted when I left. He was kind of emotional, whatnot, made me a little emotional as well. I don't know other assignments. I knew people like Fermi, for example. He was probably about 5'1" at the most, maybe 98 pounds soaking wet. It was rumored that he could see a string of boxcars going by, and you know every boxcar has a serial number on it about that long, maybe 8 or 10 figures in it, that he could add them up in his mind just as they went by, like a human computer. I don't know if that's a fact or if it's a fiction about Fermi, but he was well regarded in the site. as was everybody else. There was a lot of respect in those people, and like I said, I've seen a lot of working groups. I've been in a lot of working groups. I've never seen the dedication that I saw there. It was unique, and lucky for us, it was successful. That's a lot of what I've done. My service in service, I say the Germans did what the Japanese couldn't do. They shot us down a few times, but luckily we survived it all, and everybody survived. Got banged up a little bit here and there, but crash landing and things like that. But had miracles. I saw miracles occurring right in front of me many times during that period of time. And I came back, and we worked and retired, and we raised 5 children who were all very successful themselves, we're happy to say. And most, if not all of them, are in the sciences and math fields, and very successful, all with advanced degrees, etc. So, and we're now celebrating our 70th anniversary in just a couple of short months, and we've accomplished a lot as well. We look back and we say, how the hell did we ever do it? I can't believe it. But we did it one step at a time, and it all worked out for us as well.
Amazing.
Yeah, I have a photograph. On my office wall, I have a painting of the plane, of one of the planes we flew. We also crash landed it, so we ruined it. But it's a painting I had on my office wall in Geneva, Switzerland. And we had a lot of German visitors come through my office, etc. And some of them didn't particularly care to see a warplane on the wall, but others did. Japanese, Chinese said okay, and Italians had no problem with it, and neither did the Swiss or English, of course, or French. But our air base, there was a young man who lived near our air base, a young Britisher. And he was like 12, 13 years old when we were there. But he was fascinated with the American flyers and the planes and the records and all that sort of thing. And he was an artist. He had great artistic skills. And as a young boy, he had great skills. Well, he developed those skills all along, and then he started painting those planes. Each one is, while they're the same manufacturer, is a different plane because it's a different crew, and they have a different name on the nose of the plane and different figurines and all that kind of stuff. So he kept a record of all that as much as he could. And when the base closed down, he had access to all the base records, and he got all those. And he made a lot of paintings of the actual planes. And I contacted him when we lived in Geneva, and I asked him would he paint a certain plane, the top of the mark, we called it. It was named for the fact that the last 3 days we were in the States before we shipped out. We thought we were going to the Pacific. We wound up in the Atlantic. Before we shipped out and went cross-country to Boston to get on a troop ship to go to England, we spent at the Mark Hopkins Hotel in San Francisco. You familiar with it? There's a room at the top. It's called the Top of the Mark. I think it rotates. I'm not sure. But we spent 3 fantastic nights there. Our crew did. Raising a little hell, but having a great time. Great memories. So one of the times we got a brand new plane because we wrecked the other one. And the crew chief the ground crew chief says, "What do you want to name it?" And we couldn't, I didn't think, I don't know, your wife, your girlfriend, too many conflicts that way, favoritism. So he said, "Why don't we put a top of the mark on there?" I said, "Okay." So he printed top of the mark on there, and someone else printed a lady underneath it with very little clothes on. So that was the plane that I liked the best, and he painted that picture. And that painting is on my wall right now. It's about that wide, and it's about this high. And I take photographs of it, and people think it's a photograph. It's so precisely done, down to the rivets on the plane. It's unreal, this guy's skill. If you wanted to see it, you're welcome to see it. And that's where, in that room, is where I had that certificate from Vannevar Bush. It's been on my wall since I got it, I guess, because it was my only link with the University of Chicago.